Hello and welcome from the ASU+GSV Summit, where over 7,000 leaders in education and workforce learning are talking about the future of education and learning. I'm Jennifer Lee, partner at GSV Ventures. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined with someone who's been changing how corporations think about knowledge transfer and delivering corporate learning. So Michael is the co-founder and CEO of Arist, the pioneer in push-based learning around key moments of need, and a company that's redefining how we skill and upskill the modern workforce. Michael, it's really great to have you.
Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Awesome. So let's kick it off. Let's start at the core of Arist. One of the things that really sets you apart is this idea of pushed versus pull-based learning. For those listeners who are maybe not as familiar with this concept, maybe you can start off just by defining what is push learning.
Yeah, totally. So the way that we think about it is that today, if you're in an enterprise, every single learning tool that you have, your content library, your LMS, your LXP, and even a lot of newer tools where you're layering an LLM on top of a bunch of content, all of them require the learner to break their flow of work, go into a third-party tool, know what they need to learn, and then sit down for 30 minutes to an hour to go through a learning experience, right? And there's two challenges with that. The first one is that most people don't know what they don't know, right? And many of the most critical learning experiences are actually predictive or push top down, right? Like you can imagine tariffs, right? Like you need to, ideally a CEO or leadership team should push that learning to the right people internally, right? Or a new competitive update. And the other core challenge is that that's just not how effective behavior change happens, right? Behavior change happens through bite-sized experiences that are easily digestible, spaced out over time. One of the things that's made Duolingo so successful. So for us, push learning is how do you deliver the exact right information to the right person at the right place at the right time, meet them where they are, and make learning hyper-contextual and relevant to exactly what they need to accomplish in that moment of need.
Awesome. And you talked about this. It's all about eventually behavioral changes, right? Can you kind of also now expand on how is the importance of push-based learning in terms of driving outcomes?
Yeah, totally. So the way that we think about it is that if you're delivering a learning experience, you usually want one of two things to happen, right? You want either somebody to remember something, right? Like you want them to actually retain a concept, or you want them to shift to their behavior. And a tactical example of that is you want a sales rep to follow a sales methodology, right? Or you want a manager to be able to effectively give and receive feedback. And the reality is that if you sit down a manager for a 2-hour-long session on giving and receiving feedback, they're not going to all of a sudden be way better at giving and receiving feedback, right? What's going to get them there is practicing every single day over a long period of time, right? We think about learning kind of like going to the gym, right? If you want real change, you have to go every single day for, a bit of time at least, right? And do it consistently over a longer time horizon. So with Arist, our goal is that every single day learners get a bite-sized, concept or case study. We immediately push them to practice, right, to help with knowledge retention, and then we push them to action or exercise of some kind. And we're taking 5 to 10 minutes of their time a day, but over the course of a few days or a few weeks, they're building real skills and are actually able to achieve the outcomes that they want. Because from our point of view, outcomes are what really matter, right? Sure, it's great if your sales team has a certain set of skills, but you ultimately want them to sell, right? You ultimately want your manager, engagement scores to go up. And so that's why we're so focused on how do you help people actually tactically achieve the right outcomes or skills to improve sort of how they do their work.
Yeah. And I love the analogy about going to the gym. It's constant, it's practice, it's building the muscle. But not all of us are great at going to the gym. How does ours think about balancing that proactive encouragement with not over nagging, balancing that right push and inspiring that motivation without going that too far?
Yeah, totally. So it's funny. The same principles apply in terms of how do you make it easy for people to go to the gym, right? The same principles apply for Arist. We're obsessed with user experience, right? We need to make learning as easy and as relevant and as a one-click or a zero-click as possible, right? So what that means for us is that we deliver learning directly in the messaging tools that people already use, right? People check Slack or text message or Teams chat once every 6 minutes. They check their LMS once every 6 weeks, right? And even a lot of tools like an LXP, they check once a week, maybe at best, right? And so the first step is how do you make this super, super easy for people to engage with and lower the bar of engagement as sort of low as possible. And so that usually means delivering it in the flow of work, using internal context clues, right? So data from tools like Salesforce, from your HRIS to trigger learning at a moment of need, right? And then making it super easy to have that first engagement, right? What we find is that if somebody can read a lesson and engage in a matter of a minute, then we can, layer on more content over time, but we have to get them to engagement as soon as possible. So it's just like really thinking about how do we make this as easy as humanly possible to engage with. And once people are engaged, then we can sort of capture their attention and then get them to do more reps, if you will.
Yeah. One of the hot topics at this conference has been multimodality of inputs, but as well as output. And I remember a while ago, we had a conversation actually in studies, and if you'd be willing to share kind of what Arist has found around the differences in types of output, text-based versus voice, video, and what your guys' thesis is around that.
Yeah, totally. So all of our data, and I think this has been confirmed by research from Stanford, UPenn, and a number of other institutions, indicates that, learning styles are a myth, right? So video is great if you want somebody to like engage, quote unquote, right? But that engagement is just them passively watching a video and not them actually building any real knowledge or any real skill or towards any real outcome, right? From our point of view, it's, there's a reason why reading works. Like reading is a really effective way to build knowledge, right? And practicing in a way that feels conversational, right? Mimicking the experience of like having a conversation with your manager, having a conversation with an expert is I think from our point of view and what the research says is the best way to actually get real long-term outcomes. So Arist courses are structured, very similar to like what a Duolingo experience looks like, right? So there are images, there are GIFs, we can embed videos if absolutely necessary. But from our point of view, a conversation is the most effective modality. It's the easiest modality for everybody to engage with. It's the easiest modality to translate, to personalize, easy to sort of reach people. So we're very focused on like, how do we just make this as, as similar to what people experience on a day-to-day basis. And we're not huge fans of multimodality out, right? Like big fans of multimodality in terms of creating the training. But the reality is like, there's a reason why Duolingo works really well for like 98% of learners. Same thing for Arist.
I appreciate that perspective and that, okay, so if you're really trying to meet people in the flow of work, if their flow of work right now is currently a single modality, then it makes sense to stay in that particular flow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit here because I think one of the other areas that is really interesting and a big part of the conversation and a segment of the population that people care about deeply is Gen Z.
Yeah.
Right? As we talk about workforce and changes over in generations. You guys have done a lot of interesting research on that. What can you share just some basic myths or learnings that you have in terms of working with and helping Gen Z skill and upskill?
Yeah, totally. So I think there's this common myth that Gen Z has like a super low attention span and that we're like, so TikTokified that we can like barely engage in any real experience, right? And the reality is that Gen Z wants what everybody else wants, but Gen Z just has a higher BS filter, I guess, right? And so like Gen Z will be very, very vocal if they don't love a learning experience, right? So like we did this interesting study where we compared like Gen Z's perceptions on e-learning, right? And then like everybody else's perceptions on e-learning. And everybody felt the same way. Like everybody hates e-learning, right? But Gen Z was just super vocal about it, right? And so I think that the most important thing with the Gen Z is that if you are under 30, right? Or honestly, if you're under like 40, right? You are used to having very, very consumerized experiences in every aspect of your life, right? So what that means is that you are used to clicking one button and getting food delivered to your door, right? You're used to clicking a button and having a car show up, right? You're used to all of these experiences where teams of 500 people have spent a ton of time optimizing the experience and making it as easy as possible, right? And then you go into an enterprise experience and it's like 20 clicks to access like a 3-minute video, right? And so the most important thing is that if you are building experiences for Gen Z in the workplace, you are competing with really, really well optimized and well designed consumer tools. And as a result, you have to meet the same bar for user experience, right? Like user experience design ends up mattering pretty much more than anything else.
Do you have any thesis as to why the UX has been so historically suboptimal in many of the enterprise tools?
Yeah, totally. I think it's because we're tied to really, really antiquated learning mediums. And I think before AI, it's been really difficult for an enterprise learning organization to move past like those mediums, right? So to give you an example, we work with a large pharmaceutical company that, historically had like 100,000 SCORM files, right? And so, they don't want to give up all of those SCORM files, but what that means is that, their LMS supports SCORM, right? Their LXP supports, these sort of pathways. And so they are creating, whenever they default to creating a course, they default to creating an hour-long e-learning or a Swarm file, right? And those mediums end up having to be stored in these systems that are far, far away. I think the other core consideration here is that the LMS was designed for compliance, and now learning teams are accountable for performance, right? And so there's a mismatch in terms of what the tool was designed for and what L&D teams actually need to deliver. And that's why like every experience feels a compliance experience, because everyone's trying to use one tool to accomplish what is really like a completely different remit.
I think as you see that shift happening, like what do you think will be kind of the next form factors of like great UX then for these learning management systems or other tools that help drive skilling and reskilling in a way that is actually effective, right?
Yeah.
And not compliance?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I really think, we firmly believe that it's going to be like pull, push, and practice, right? And what we mean by that is that on the practice side, I think, in moments when you need to like practice a hard conversation or practice a talk track, there's a ton of great tools where you can, like use an AI simulation to practice. I think that's going to be, I'm pretty optimistic about those tools. You'll then, in critical moments of need, where the organization or your manager has identified that, hey, we need to train you on this new product, or we need to train you on this critical skill or critical outcome gap that you're having. Organizations likely use a tool like Arist to push that learning and create it very quickly and personalize it and deliver it using AI and Teams and Slack. And then I think the LMS and the LXP will sort of get abstracted away into like, a box of content with an LLM on top, right? And I think what's going to happen is that if you are in the situation where you want to pull learning that's enterprise specific, you'll type in like, hey, I want to, get a deeper understanding of our Q4 earnings. And, an LLM will, structure out an experience for you that will, teach you or train you on that over time using all of the existing Swarm files and all of the existing approved content that an organization has.
I like that framework. Pull, push, practice. Is there a particular order into that?
I think what we find is that within organizations, like 80% of learning actually needs to be pushed, right? Like all of the most critical learning, like really does need to be pushed to the right people. From our point of view, 15% is pulled. Like people, it's been funny, like as organizations have deployed LLMs internally for learning, like the retention rates and the usage rates fall off a cliff after 2 weeks, right? Learners don't actually know what they don't know and are really bad at pulling content, right? That's why like every single retention curve for an LMS or an LXP is not great. So I think it's like 80% push, 15%, and a lot of that push will end up being automated based on internal triggers.
Sure.
15% pull, and then about 5% practice, because practice only is relevant in like very specific moments.
Cool. All right, so I need to refactor that. Push, pull, practice.
Yep.
I'm gonna lock it down. Okay, so last question for you. We're here in what is arguably described as the Davos for education and learning technology. I have to ask, what conversations are you excited about? What tidbits are you here to learn?
Yeah, totally. What I've been really excited about is twofold. One, I'm noticing a lot of quote unquote legacy players, right? Old like content libraries, LXPs, LMSs start to realize that they need to make a modality shift, and that the modalities that they built their platforms around are no longer like going to keep them relevant, right? I think people, and so that's very exciting. I think we're actually, AI, I think, is making everybody a lot more competitive and like trying to do a lot more innovative work in a way that I haven't seen historically. I think on the learning side, this is actually less a conversation that I'm excited about, more a conversation that I'm worried about. Noticing a lot of organizations get a little bit bogged down by skill mapping and skill taxonomies, right? And what I mean by that is that a lot of organizations are investing so many resources doing skill mapping, skill tagging, skill analysis, that they're kind of forgetting that they have another role where they need to deliver learning fast to the right people, right? And I worry that the skills discussion, is not very AI proof. Like I think AI will just be very good at like analyzing and tagging skills ambiently in the next year or two, and all of these taxonomies will kind of go extinct or will be irrelevant. So it's been an interesting conversation and kind of observing the public versus private discussions on skills.
That is an intriguing one. I mean, I think aligned with you that eventually AI will be able to really have very dynamic knowledge and skills graphs and overlaying that with roles and responsibilities. And then it becomes, well, how do we move people along that? So it's very intriguing. Cool. All right. Thank you so much again, Michael, for joining us. For people who want to learn more about Arist, where should they go?
Yeah, arist.co. My email is michael@arist.co, so feel free to shoot me a note as well. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.